Venezuela as a country has an interesting history of both right-wing military gun grabbers as well as left-wing socialist gun grabbers. And where has that left them? Well, right now it may have left them rioting and on fire, as it looks like the current socialist president Maduro has lost the election by a percentage of about 77% of the votes to about his 23%, but he's refusing to leave power. And part of what's keeping him there is the fact that privately owned firearms are all but banned. We're going to be covering some of that in this video, except for the fact that certain civilian paramilitary groups have been allowed to be armed because why? They support the regime. How did we get here? Learn the lessons of Venezuela. We're going to be going through key statistics to show you how gun control does not work. Guys, we're going to be taking a look at the Venezuela example of both right-wing and left-wing abuse of their equivalent to the Second Amendment. Let's get into it. So let's start off by taking a look at some of just the baseline statistics. Looking at a per capita basis, so in other words, per 100 people, Venezuela has about 18.5 firearms per 100 people. This compares to the United States, where for every 100 people, we're the only country in the world with more than one firearm per person at 120. After all, you have a right hand and a left hand too. Keep that in mind. However, when we start looking at the intentional homicide rate, now this is usually expressed when we're looking at massive statistics at the number of intentional homicides per 100,000 residents per year. So per 100,000 residents or inhabitants per year. For Venezuela, we're looking at 36.7 as compared to the United States, where now if we break this down a little bit, because I know that if you're like me, you're going to have questions. If we're talking about what the FBI, see attached study in the description box below, what the FBI basically classified as large metropolitan areas and cities. So generally we're looking at concentrations of cities of about 250,000 and up in size. We're usually seeing this range per 100,000 be anywhere from about 8.9 to 13.4 people. Again, we're talking intentional homicide rate. So the United States, 13.9 to 8.4-ish. Its cities greater than 250. Venezuela, about 3 times, maybe 4 times that at about 36. If we start looking at American suburbs, now we're down to 3.2. So we're talking approximately a quarter the rate-ish of major metropolitan cities in the United States. And the rural areas are about the same at about 3.5. So what does this all mean? Bottom line, the United States has about 7 times the firearms, looking at a per capita basis, while our suburbs and rural areas have about a 90% lower homicide rate, or if we're talking about major metropolitan U.S. cities, Venezuela still has between about 300 to 400% higher intentional homicide rate when comparing the two. Just as a note, about 71% of all homicides around the world tend to be committed by firearms. That number can wander significantly from country to country. I've got a few outliers. Jamaica, I think, is over 90% or something like that. I'm pulling that from memory, not in my show notes here. So someone fact check me in the comment section below if I get that wrong. But just understand that this can vary from country to country. Also as a note, the United States is about 59th, 5'9", on the intentional homicide rate when looking at countries around the world. Venezuela is number 6. This is not something you want to be a low number at. You do not want to be number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, as of course a reminder, the United States is first in firearm ownership per capita. First. Venezuela, by rate, is 35th. Now, obviously, let me say what you are thinking for you. If guns were the canonical problem, if guns were the root cause of intentional homicide, we should see a direct link of the country with the most number of firearms per capita also has the highest number of intentional homicides per capita, right? Yet here we see almost a complete inversion. And this is, by the way, not some sort of cherry-picked outlier. If you actually look at the top 25 countries by homicide rate per capita, none of those countries are in the top 25 countries for firearms per capita. In other words, none of the most armed countries are you most likely to be the victim of an intentional homicide in. Is that a coincidence? Okay, but what's going on here? How did we get here? Quick recap. Under the military dictatorship of General Juan Gomez in 1914 and then followed up in 1919, there was basically a series of disarmament laws that were decreed, ordering that nearly every gun and weapon owner must surrender their guns and weapons to the government. The only exceptions were basically machetes and hunting shotguns. The stated reason? Oh, come on, you know the answer to that. Common sense gun control. We have to reduce crime. Of course. However, many historians today now argue that really reducing crime, not what the government was about. Instead, it was actually meant to disarm the population to prevent uprisings against the military dictatorship. Gun control being used for an ulterior purpose? Who'd have thought? I appreciate you joining me for this video. Hit that like button, and my question for you today is this. If people had been armed in Venezuela going back 100 years, would the country have ever gotten to where it is today, or would have things gone differently? Let me know in the comment field below. Then almost 100 years later, in 2012, Venezuela banned the private sale of firearms and ammunition, again with the stated purpose of lowering crime rates. It's amazing how it apparently did not work the first time around, right? Now, rest assured that the army, the police, as well as certain groups that are, quote, trusted by the government, end quote, you cannot make this up, are exempt from these bans and can continue to purchase, own, possess various firearms and ammunition from the government, as well as government-owned manufacturers. Now, one of these groups that I want to zero in on that is trusted by the government is a collection of people referred to as the Colectivos. The recent Venezuelan government has been a far-left socialist regime, so it's not a surprise to learn that the Colectivos happen to be identified as being a far-left Venezuelan armed group. Now, look, this is not a team red, team blue. This is not a right-left thing. Don't lose me on this. If the government was right-wing, it would be the right-wing groups that were trusted by the government. That is both entirely the point that I'm making and not the point that I'm making right now, all at the same time. But the point is, I'm not trying to make a left-right thing. That's not what this is about. Human Rights Watch has described the Colectivos as, quote, armed gangs who use violence with impunity, end quote, to target and harass political opponents of the Venezuelan regime. Amnesty International calls them, quote, armed pro-government supporters who are tolerated or supported by the authorities, end quote. Colectivos have attacked anti-government protesters, including apparently sending death threats to journalists. The United Nations Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Venezuela concluded in its first report that the Venezuelan authorities and Colectivos committed violations amounting to what was described as crimes against humanity. Also, and last one I'll throw in here, because this could keep going on and on and on, prosecutors at the International Criminal Court have indicated that there's a reasonable basis to believe that since at least April 2017, that the Colectivos have been involved in committing crimes against humanity. Now, I know for those of you who are students of history, this is a real shocker. You ban firearms from the population, you make people defenseless, and only the pro-government thugs and paramilitary groups are allowed to be armed. And get this, apparently when you disarm people, bad things can happen. Who would have thought it? So why am I talking about all of this right now? Well, just days ago, there was a major election in Venezuela. It appears that the hard left President Maduro may have lost. At the time of filming, this is all very unconfirmed. But there is an effort to win by force what may have been lost by persuasion at the ballot box, as it is being rumored with reported images and videos that President Maduro has summoned his Colectivos to take to the streets to help him secure a victory from defeat. Now, again, I cannot emphasize enough that this is a breaking story and none of this has been conclusively confirmed. What I can confirm for you is that Venezuela ranks 6th highest country for intentional homicide rates. And all that is despite having a very low number of firearms scattered across the population. Obviously, something there just doesn't fit. People lose sight of the fact that the Second Amendment is not only about fighting crime. It's about fighting tyranny and preventing tyranny. And Venezuela, unfortunately, is a case study in both. Our quote of the day comes from noted Stoic thinker Zeno, quote, "Man conquers the world by conquering himself." Don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment what you think about all this going on down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.